right, great. I'll get started. And as people trickle in, we will kind of bring them into the conversation. But thank you so much for attending our webinar about how to support caretakers at work and really promote inclusive benefits. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the partnerships and community manager here at AllVoices. Just to provide some context, AllVoices is an employee feedback management platform, EFMP, that enables employees to anonymously and safely report harassment, bias, and culture issues directly to their company leadership. And we collect that anonymized data and share it with company leaders so they can really take action and create that psychologically safe culture. And with AllVoices, companies can have access to real-time, proactive data that helps them identify issues before they become those systemic problems, helping them improve company culture holistically and provide that safe space for employees to really feel heard. Today, we're discussing a really timely topic around going beyond parental leave policies to support working parents and caregivers at large. To provide some context around stats, more than 2 million women specifically were pushed out of the US workforce last year to care for a dependent or family member in need. In a recent Time's Up study found that 1/3 of all US employees actually had to leave their job in order to manage an unmet caregiving responsibility even before the pandemic hit. A 2017 Harvard Business Review study found that more than 80% of employees who are caregivers said that it really impacted their productivity. And just to provide some examples of companies who are stepping up too, in addition to Maven and Brightwheel, Zillow has offered inclusive benefits around family planning, offering free overnight breast milk shipping for nursing mothers who are away on business trips, in addition to benefits like flexible return to work scheduling after parental leave, healthcare coverage for infertility services, and a stipend or an assistance that can be applied towards the cost of adopting a child as well. So with all that context, I will stop talking and ask the two fabulous panelists to please introduce themselves. If you could share your pronouns, role, and the work you do at your company, that would be great for those who aren't familiar. Sana, I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sana Rahim. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a senior HR business partner and people programs leader for Brightwheel. Brightwheel's mission is to transform early education for every teacher, parent, and child across the globe. Essentially, we're a product that helps child care centers to manage attendance, billing, enrollment, and parent communications in one place. So I just became a parent this year, so I haven't yet been on the other side of Brightwheel, but from what I know from a lot of my parent friends, Brightwheel is a very beloved product for parents to understand how their kids are doing on a day-to-day and getting live updates. And also for the folks that run early childhood education centers, just a really helpful product to do all of the day-to-day in one place. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and excited to chat today.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Karsten, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, I'm Karsten Vagner. I lead the people team at Maven Clinic. Maven is the largest virtual clinic for women's and family healthcare. We have supported more than 10 million women and families on their paths to parenthood and paths through parenthood and paths back into the workplace. Really excited to get to spend my time doing that work. It's great to be here today.
Awesome. And before we dive into, I have a lot of questions, but I know we were talking on the pre-call about kind of your journey, both of your journeys into working parenthood and caregivers experiences. If you don't mind, would you share your caregiving story and how that has really informed how you show up to work? Karsten, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So my husband and I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, and we adopted her, and we didn't know anything about the adoption process. It was all kind of new to us at the time. And our adoption agency and attorneys and everybody kind of told us at some point, a potential birth mother will choose you to be the family where she places her baby. And then you'll have several months together to build a relationship, see how that feels, before the baby comes. So you can imagine our surprise when we got a call saying, hey, somebody has selected you and she's due tomorrow. So we became parents very fast, way faster than we expected. And we were just so lucky to have a great network of people around us who basically, while we were at the hospital, set up our apartment. We gave them our Amazon login and just like set up our house and got us diapers and all those kinds of things because we were not ready. And then we were.
I love that. That's a quick turnaround tomorrow. But I love that. Sana, what about you?
I actually have a similar story in a very different context, which is, so yeah, I got pregnant last year and I had a pretty difficult pregnancy, to be vulnerable. And just a shout out, I don't know if any of my Renaissance colleagues are on the line, but Renaissance was super kind to me, super empathetic, and really gave me a lot of flexibility during that time to deal with appointments and taking time off unexpectedly. But yeah, I also similarly basically had to have my child early. His name is Hamza. He's now 6 months old, but he came early, very unexpectedly, and I became a mom kind of 3 months sooner than I expected to. And yeah, I think for me, like this topic, I was telling Christina when she invited me, is super personal now, given what I experienced this year and having a kind of a completely different lens. And I'm sure Karsten would agree, like once you go through this transformation and becoming a parent, you have a kind of an entirely different degree of empathy and kind of curiosity about what companies can be doing to support people on this journey, whatever their journey looks like, and really pushing the boundaries of like what we've held ourselves to in the past, right? Going beyond leave, which is, yeah, super important, but what else can we really be doing to support parents and caregivers and working through this transformative time in their life?
Absolutely. And there's a lot that can be done, that going beyond parental leave, which is really important and something that we've talked about as well. And one of the kind of starting points of the conversation that we want to talk about is how we define really inclusive benefits that go beyond kind of those table stakes. Sana, how do you think about defining those inclusive benefits and what that looks like tangibly?
Yeah, so I think benefits in a lot of ways are an articulation of your values, right? Of like how you think about your employees, what investments you're making for your employees, and what you're willing to do to really optimize their health, their well-being, all of that. And I think when you think about inclusive benefits, I think it's then thinking about, right, how do we specifically think about when we think about underrepresented groups or people that historically have not been centered in the design of our policies and of our benefit programs. So, that's kind of what I think of it as, is like the benefits are articulation of your values and how much you care about your employees. When you then bring in the inclusion part to the conversation, is how does that work when you think about the most kind of underrepresented folks? And also just thinking horizontally about all of your employees and their identities across the board, right? And how are we thinking about meaningfully meeting everyone's needs, which I know is a super challenging question. And so I think tactically, these are things like, I think about like holidays, right? For so long, our holiday calendars have been dictated by a couple of identity groups, right? And not really centering broader folks in the conversation around like religious holidays, culture holidays, or even broadly like time off, right? Like how is time off designed, and who is it designed for, and how does it really work? Things like flexible working schedules, leave policies, also things like professional development. I think from an equity standpoint, right? Like what do your benefits look like to build the knowledge and skills for folks who might not have had the same access to opportunities coming into the role that they're in at your company. And then of course, I think from a health standpoint, right, there's a whole swath, and I'm super curious about what Karsten will talk about, but right, in terms of inclusive benefits around like providers and culturally competent care and gender affirmation treatment, right? There's a whole world now that we're learning about healthcare benefits that we really haven't centered before. So that's kind of how I think about it, define it, and also the types of things that come to mind as we explore what inclusive benefits really look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Karsten, do you have like a kind of a similar way of thinking about inclusive benefits as well, specifically within kind of healthcare and just like things like that?
I mean, I don't think I could say it better than Sana just did, right? Inclusive benefits should include everyone.
Absolutely. And we know in terms of inclusive benefits, Sana, I think you hit the nail on the head too, in terms of parents are one type of caregiver. We're talking about caregivers today as well. We know that 1 in 6 Americans in the workforce are caregivers for an adult. And knowing that, knowing that caregiving looks so different for everyone, it's really interesting to think about where we begin in this conversation. So if we do go back to using kind of parents as an example of this cohort, Karsten, you talked about you asked what do parents really need to feel like they are supported. Can you walk us through what you heard and what that process was?
Yeah, the process actually started before that. First step was figuring out who our parents are, who our caregivers are. To your point, right? Not everybody is a parent. That doesn't mean they're not taking care of somebody, right? And it wasn't anything that I'd ever done before. Really sat down and like looked at what percent of this company is made up by people who are taking care of other people. And when COVID hit, we recognized, well, this is a group that needs our support early on. And so we just figured out who they were, and then we asked them if they wanted to talk, and you won't be surprised to hear that they all did, right? So we did a call like this with all of our caregivers at Maven, and discovered something that I think we all already fundamentally know, but maybe just forgot or weren't thinking of in the moment at work. And that is that not all parents have the exact same needs, right? So parent of a newborn, parent of a teenager, parent of someone who has special needs, parent of well, all different kinds of parents. And then there are people who are taking care of adults or taking care of their own parents. They have different needs too. And so what we learned in conversations with these folks at Maven was that one broad stroke answer wasn't going to be the solution, but actually encouraging people to build this muscle of speaking up and feeling empowered to talk about what they needed. And there were definitely things that we did at our company to help them. But I think the biggest learning I had was don't assume what people need, and don't kind of put one kind of lens on everyone, because you have no idea what's really going on outside of these Zoom windows, right? All the time, and making sure that you're there as HR leaders, as people who are thinking about benefits, to support your employees in that way. I really do think starts with listening, and not just listening once, but creating this cadence where people feel they have a place to share what they're thinking. If we've learned anything over these past 18 months now of a pandemic, it's that those needs evolve pretty quickly.
Absolutely. I think a one size fits all approach, or kind of a checking the box solution for, we support parents of all kind of ages of children, is really important. Can you kind of give an example of how Maven supports kind of the stage of family planning and then working parents with children of all ages?
Sure. So there are so many different ways to become parents. As you just heard, Sana and I have very different experiences, but we both have kids now. So if you're someone who's thinking about that, if you're considering fertility route, if you're considering a maternity route, if you're looking to adopt the way I did, or surrogacy, or if you know that parenting is in your future and maybe egg freezing is something that you want to think about, or you're not sure, but you need to talk to someone who's done this more than you have, right? Some kind of counselor, some kind of coach, reproductive endocrinologist, whoever it happens to be. Maven has a network of all of those types of providers. And once you're on one of those paths, let's assume you're pregnant, we have doulas and all different kinds of specialists to help you along the way. And we don't do this because it's just the right and nice thing to do. It really also makes the healthcare system better. And that is our mission, to change the healthcare of the world. Because ultimately what we're seeing with employers who offer Maven to their employees as a benefit is that those healthcare costs go down. NICU rates go down, C-section rates go down. We see healthier and better outcomes at a time when women in the United States are at higher risk of mortality after giving birth than their mothers were. So this is something that needs to be addressed, hasn't been addressed, isn't talked about enough. And these are the types of things that we address by offering the largest virtual clinic and a network of providers like this. So that's pre-parenthood. Post-parenthood, we also have coaches to help you get back to work. And we also have an entire product around parenting. I use it a lot. My 4.5-year-old becomes 22 overnight. It's really nice to have content, guides, classes that I can take. It's available to me 24/7 and all available, obviously, on my phone. So that's what Maven, those are some of the things that Maven can offer.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're really meeting folks where they are too, and kind of on demand as well in terms of content, understanding that everybody's schedule is different. So making sure that you're ingesting that information differently too. Sana, how are you thinking about this at Brightwheel in terms of supporting family planning and working parents with children of all ages, or how did you see that manifesting at Renaissance Learning when you said that they were really supportive during your journey?
Yeah, well, first I would just say, like, I wish I had had access to Maven when I was pregnant, because I candidly, like, it's so difficult to navigate the system, like to get to different specialists. Like, you're getting a doctor tell you to go to that specialist and that referral, and then that person's not covered by insurance, and then that thing is covered. So just, I'm personally like letting everyone know that I totally intend on talking to Karsten about Maven and exploring it as an option for Brightwheel employees, because it sounds fantastic. In terms of what we've done at Brightwheel, I think, first of all, just for us, it was acknowledging like that we are an early childhood education company. And so we know that parents, caregivers are a super important demographic for us. And we wanted to focus on that demographic, both from a talent acquisition standpoint, making sure we're representing the folks that we're trying to serve, but also from a culture and benefit standpoint, that are we really a desirable place to work for folks who identify as parents or caregivers. The first thing is that we've done is updated our parental leave policy up to 24 weeks with a mix of paid and unpaid time. And we made that policy gender neutral, so that it was clear that, like, this isn't about women, right? And I have talked to so many colleagues who don't identify as women and didn't get the chance to take the leave they desire to be with their child. And we also made it a blanket policy versus a pregnancy disability policy. So it also applies to folks who are adopting or fostering. We recently actually had our first employee raise his hand to take a leave of absence as a new foster father, which was super exciting to see that the benefit is actually meaningful to folks. So I'm personally just really proud of that, because I think that's really, we've put a kind of a line in the sand around kind of who we want to be for parents. We've also added a broader caregiver leave policy. So to your question of like people who are not necessarily parents, but caregivers, especially during COVID, we saw that, a lot of family was relying on one another during that time, and a lot of difficult situations were arising. So we have a broader caregiver leave policy that allows folks to take a leave of absence to take care of a loved one. It could be anyone, right? But just whoever it is, and it doesn't need to be your child. We've also just updated a lot of our insurance policies to include like broader disability coverage for like short-term, long-term. We know that things come up with like health and well-being, and we want people to take off the time they need. And then from a kind of stepping away from a benefit policy perspective, the other big thing culturally that I think was really exciting to Brightwheel about, for me personally, was we have a real focus on flexible working schedules. So like there's very little interest in like when you're working, how you're working, like when you sign on, when you sign off, when you're online, when you're not online. But as long as the work is getting done, we know that people have kids to pick up, drop off, get ready with, like in the morning, take breaks with during the day, whatever it looks like. And so really it's like you can organize your calendar however you like to just get the work done. And I've personally felt really happy about this as a new mom, that I'm not worried about like my manager looking at when I'm signing on or off, and the trust being that I'm getting the work done when it works for me. Yeah, and then I think to Karsten's point, one thing that I'm kind of working on and getting curious about is how do we support people who are returning or going to leave? I don't think there's a lot of attention paid to that ramp period and what that looks like. I'll be candid in saying when I came back from 6 months of parental leave, I felt like extremely dumb and slow. And I felt like, because you lose your mechanic. There's some just mechanics you lose when you haven't been working for 6 months in front of a screen. Like I had to rediscover Zoom and like the features that had rolled out while I was away. And I wish there was more intentional support, right? Sometimes for people who are coming back from that big life change, coming back in the workplace. So that's something that we're getting curious about at Brightwheel that we're working on.
I love that. I think it's important to note the intentional support, and that this is not kind of a siloed response to just providing inclusive benefits as a lever for supporting caretakers, working parents, and kind of other folks from underrepresented groups at your organization as well. It should be from people, HR, the team, and your peers as well. I do want to ask too, kind of how Maven supports other kind of historically underrepresented groups in terms of benefits to really kind of support their specific needs, whether it is something that kind of Sana mentioned in terms of coverage of gender affirmation treatment, trainings, or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I think we have such a rich and robust LGBTQ community at Maven is because of the benefits that we offer. It rightly should be almost a litmus test for candidates as they think about where they go. And so if you're interested in making sure that you are building an inclusive company, you want to make sure that you have the elements in place in order to do that, and benefits are certainly a place to start.
Absolutely. And I think that's important to note too. I think both of you touched on talent acquisition and just bringing folks in as potential employees as a lever to say, okay, this company cares about this, these leaders care about this. Again, I know we've been talking a lot about benefits, but the other piece to this, in addition to people and HR teams, are really people managers or any kind of formal and informal leaders at the company that people really take cues from as well. I wanted to ask kind of both of your opinions on what is the role of people teams and what is the role of people leaders to really model this inclusive behavior, to take advantage of inclusive benefits, to have these hard conversations, to say, I've been on leave for 6 months, I need like a Zoom tutorial, Sana, I'll pass to you first.
Sure. I think I'll just reference what Karsten said earlier for the people teams, like HR teams. It's listening. It's like paying attention. It's actively sourcing feedback and asking about what people's experience is like, and then figuring out what we can do about it. But I also feel like, our day-to-day interactions are kind of really wonderful feedback points. Like if someone contacts you, asks about a policy, and there's clearly a gap, it's like noting that down, right? Recognizing that we might not be able to fix it this year, but like next year when we sit down and review our benefits, like, is there an opportunity to close that gap? Because we ultimately left someone in a place where they weren't covered by what we offer. So I think it's constantly sourcing that feedback, listening to the feedback, and paying attention to what employees are telling us, and also looking around in the world. Like after this conversation, I'm like so curious to look around at like what are other companies offering and where are we potentially behind, because we know this is a fast moving space where there's a lot of disruption and innovation happening around the employee experience and benefits. So that's from the the HR people team side. In terms of people managers, I think what you said, Christina, about like people take cues, it's huge. I think the biggest culture shifts happen when leaders shift how they operate and how they behave, right? So I know personally at Brightwheel, a few people have told me like, I've seen so-and-so leader actively block off their calendar for pickup and drop off. And sometimes when they're like meal prepping for their kid, like I was just on a call with a leader at Brightwheel, and she had her camera off and she very explicitly said, I'm preparing lunch for my child right now. And so like, I'm going to be off Zoom as I'm doing this. And there was no like issue with that, right? It was like, oh, cool. Okay. Like, let's move on. Whereas I think in previous cultures, right, we know that there was a lot of like, especially I would say for women, a lot of scrutiny around their visibility and availability for work after a child and whether that was going to be the same. So I think culturally, I think leaders have such an opportunity to model that this is okay and this is to be expected, and to normalize it, that people are going to be off camera sometimes, people are not going to be available sometimes. That kind of constant availability culture, immediate response culture, that's okay, right? We don't expect everything to be turned around in 24 hours, I think is pretty important. And setting boundaries, like being okay with boundaries and modeling that those are okay and that employees should do the same. I think those are some of the things that come to mind for me.
Karsten, how do you think about kind of modeling vulnerability and kind of behavior to support caretakers, and kind of the role? Do you think that people in HR teams have a different role to play than like individual people leaders who are supporting kind of individual contributors at a company as well?
It's all connected, isn't it? Sana's right that the HR team has such an opportunity to listen and have a sense of what's going on. But I mean, the role of the HR team, the HR leader through the pandemic has really evolved. We're no longer just kind of doing the things we did in 2019. There are a lot of other things we're taking on too, and almost like helping our employees interpret the world and everything going on around them, too, which is its own job. So I think about the role of the HR team to empower those people leaders to take on more as well and to train them on how to do it. And I'm thinking specifically of this checklist that we built at Maven around returning to work. So Sana, what you're describing, like there are specific tactics that companies can do to help parents return to the workforce. Like come back on a Wednesday or a Thursday, not on Monday. So you have a short week, you're like all that kind of stuff that we've built and we give to managers so they know, oh, this is how I should handle this kind of situation, right? There are so many situations that come up, right? But I think that it's our job on the HR people teams to be proactive with managers so they can model the right behaviors, because a lot of times it's their first time doing some of this stuff too. So that's kind of how I think about it. I don't think of them as distinct. I think that one kind of is there to support the other.
Are there kind of other ways? I know you mentioned before you kind of asked parents at Maven what they needed for support, and you mentioned just not listening once, like asking again and being in a dynamic strategy. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of employee listening, kind of the trust manifesting at your organization?
Yeah, it's something that we did at the start of COVID was we actually, this might have been a little too much at first, but we asked people every day to rate their mental health and to rate how productive they thought they were. And so we could see these kind of trend lines and how they connected and how they did and how they went by team. Over time, it became, a couple times a week, and then it became weekly, bi-weekly, that kind of thing. But it was a big opportunity for people to just be honest and be real. And it gave us on my team real insight into where should we be looking right now? Where should we be like diving in, asking questions, helping people out? That helped a lot, right? Because, like any other people leader on this call or watching this video would think, like, we also have a business to run, right? So you've got a lot of different plates you're trying to spin, and you can't run the business if people aren't feeling well, right? But if you only focus on talking about that, you can't talk about the actual business initiatives too. So it's like this real balance you're always having to walk, and it helped a lot to give people this outlet every day for a while to say, like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What should we do? And so the data is ultimately the thing that mattered the most to us. So that helped a lot. We knew, we could cut the data by kind of demographic, so caregivers and all the other different kinds of groups. So we knew where we needed to really focus our energies and which ERGs we needed to talk to, which managers and which teams we needed to sit down with, and what OKRs felt unattainable at the time and how do we scale that back. All of that work just by asking people how they were doing. Pretty easy to do.
Absolutely. And we're talking about data, we're talking about a dynamic strategy and really being innovative when we're talking about inclusive benefits, how to show up for your team members as a manager, as someone on the people and HR team, someone on the diversity, equity, and inclusion team, a C-suite leader. When you're making these changes or when you're testing out these strategies, mistakes are bound to happen. And even with the best intentions, can either of you or both of you share kind of either at your companies or just something you're seeing in the world where folks kind of maybe made a mistake or kind of fell flat in supporting caretakers?
Yes. I mean, how much time do you have? Sure. I can give you one. I can give you one that just comes to mind pretty easily. At the very start of the pandemic, when I remember standing in front of our company and saying, "Everybody go home. It's just going to be for 2 weeks," right? Does everybody else remember that too? Like, we all know it's for 2 weeks, right? Like, it'll all be over then. I thought, okay, how do we help our parents, specifically parents of younger kids, get through these next 2 weeks? Because maybe those are the kids who don't have school or something else to do all day. They're not old enough to keep themselves busy. How do we remove them as kind of like a distraction or a source of stress for our parents? What can we do? And I thought, I know. We'll buy everybody a Disney Plus account. That's what we'll do. Like that will help. That will solve it all, right? Right. And then I sat down with some of our parents and said, what do you think? And they were like, no, like, like that's not the answer for everybody. And so ultimately, I think the mistake I made is just like making assumptions, right? And feeling like I have the answer without asking people that it would actually affect. And being collaborative is always the way to solve things.
Yeah. I'm also moving back to like my memories of like when the pandemic started and how we approached it. I think one thing that, and this is a tough one for all businesses and companies, and I don't really know that I have an answer to it. And I don't even know if it's like necessarily a mistake, but I think sometimes there was a presumption that like parents could still like do it all, that it was possible that they could be like caregiving all day and also give us a 40-hour work week and like produce the results. And I think that was a mistake. I mean, I don't think that was probably the right way to think about it. And I think like even now we're still struggling with this, right? Because we know like we're not out of this pandemic and schools are closing left and right. And like childcare centers are like, it's a tough situation. And so I think it's tough for businesses because it's always going to be tough for business to like move back in OKR or like move down a deadline, because especially in the startup tech space, right? Like that's all about like moving as fast as possible. But I think we're in a situation now where like we're going to be pressed on that. Like it's at some point you do feel like, can we truly say like we're super inclusive, equitable, empathetic, but we're also not going to budge on these like super ambitious, challenging goals? I think like at some point we're going to have to make some tough calls there. And it's something that I don't have a perfect answer to, but I'm curious about. And I have felt at times, especially in some of my conversations with parents and caregivers, kind of in the heat of the pandemic burnout, where I felt like people were like, I wish there would have been an explicit conversation that just told me that it was okay that I wasn't going to finish this thing by this date, given everything I had going on. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think burnout is definitely a very relevant topic, especially we're not only talking about work burnout, but burnout from life and everything that everybody has going on as well. I know we're talking about kind of assumptions and collecting the data. If anyone has questions in the audience, please feel free to drop it in the chat or send it to one of us directly. But someone asked a question around those assumptions. So if they're, before we collect data, for our employees. So if they haven't done kind of a survey or pulsed employees, but we're a fast growing tech company with not a lot of parents, assumably, is it okay to kind of test things out for the needs of working parents or caretakers to really attract talent, kind of thinking like the chicken and the egg situation? What are your thoughts?
Sana, go ahead.
I think it's fun. I mean, I think now there's like some research that's been done this year, and also like there's some probably some solid best practices that most parents would say are a good thing, like flexible schedules, like being willing to look through your like leave policies and making sure they're competitive with the market. I think like there are some basic things you should put into place if you're really interested in making sure that you have a representative, that you have parents or caregivers represented at your company. I also think just like something you could quickly do is just like survey a few people. Like, I mean, I'm sure everyone knows like 5 parents, just like talk to them and see like what are their biggest challenges and what are their biggest needs when it comes to the workplace right now. Because to Karsten's point, I do think things have evolved so much in 18 months. I also think employee expectations have evolved. I think we're now seeing people be more willing to leave a workplace if they don't feel like they're getting the benefits they want from that place, or they're not being valued in the way they'd like to be valued. I mean, I know there's all this kind of discussion about the the grand resignation, and I think things are changing. I think retention is going to become really tricky for some of the most talented people in the market, because they know that there's places that will offer them the perks and the benefits that they're looking for, in addition to compensation. And some people are leaving for less compensation, for a better culture and better perks and benefits. So I think we're going to be pressed soon around these topics. Like we're going to be pressed by force by employees who are going to demand more of us.
Yeah, I would add to that. You don't want to be the company that has to scramble. I feel like there are lots of those, right? One person says, "Ooh, I'm about to become a parent." what do you have for me?
Right.
And the company says, hold on 1 minute. Hurries back and like, what do we do? What do we do? So put something together. And if you're not sure how, Sana's advice is a good one. Talk to other parents. But you also may just want to consider who you want to be as a company. What are your values? You know, what makes the most sense for your business, for your culture? What types of people do you want to attract or repel, as it may be? Like all of those kinds of thought exercises will get you to a good idea of how you want to support people.
Yeah.
So that's I don't think it's bad to like assume what parents want if you don't have any parents and you're trying to create an environment that welcomes parents, but make it really about the long term and who you want to be. Assume you do have 100 parents. How would you treat them?
Yeah. Can I actually add something to what Karsten just described? Like, oh, like, what do we do? That happens so much.
Right.
The startup space where like companies are just growing really rapidly and they're hiring. There's not a lot of people infrastructure. And I'm sure Karsten and I could talk all day long about how people should need to hire heads of people way sooner in the growth trajectory. Like, I don't want to join you when you're already 100 people. I want to join you maybe when you're way so, but I think to that point, like, especially for like folks who are co-founders or the kind of founding members of a team, like it's never too early to start thinking about that because it will happen, especially if you're trying to prioritize diversity early on. You're going to run up against some really interesting questions and potentially even conflicts around like, what do we want this workplace to look like? What are our cultural values? So like, I do think sometimes people think about that way later because a lot of people are like, and yes, building the product's important, getting into the market is important. All those things are great. But at some point, when your most talented people come up to you and say like, I need this, and that experience can be make or break. Like I've seen either like that there's an exceptional response and we really impress this person and now they want to stick with us forever, or like we really don't have a great response and then give them a very stingy offer because we're too worried about what will happen to the company, right? And then like you lose that person. So these are really important interactions for employees. Like when I go to my boss and I say I'm pregnant, the response I get is like probably one of the most important responses I'm going to get that in terms of predicting how long I'm going to stay at this company. So like, we really should not underestimate how important these conversations are and how much they impact your kind of overall ability to retain your talented people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing you're proactive. Imagine what it would be like if you had 100 or even 50 parents at your company. And then doing external market research, right? Like there's an opportunity to look to see, there's a bunch of websites, databases of who's offering what and kind of the reality of being creative and really setting up that environment as well for success. Another question that someone had was, this is very specific, but in terms of caretakers beyond like the very sad kind of bereavement period that is offered at for like aging parents who have passed away, how can folks support taking care of aging parents for employees who have that as their responsibility and not kind of children?
All kinds of ways. There are so many different services that help elderly folks, whether that's through grocery delivery or medicine delivery or rides to and from doctor's appointments or whatever it may be. So you may want to consider a contribution to your dependent care flex spending account if you offer that. You may want to create a particular stipend for caregivers and be clear about what's covered. And it's not just nursery school or babysitters, but just the language that you use. Maybe it's also home delivery care, or whatever it happens to be for these cases, just to let those folks know they're included in a stipend like that. Another thing that's just real when you're taking care of an elderly parent or an elderly relative is how expensive it is. It's awfully expensive. So how can you help create wealth for your employees, which is something we should all be thinking about all the time, right? Whether that's through a 401k match program, or whether that's through buyback programs if you offer equity in your company. So non-obvious things sometimes, but really removing some of these big boulders of stress for folks or reducing them in the ways that you can are different ways that you can help employees who are taking care of elderly folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that was great. I think those are like fantastic things and things that every company should be thinking about. The only other thing I would say is like just like flexibility again. Flexibility is so life-changing. Like if we can just move beyond the clock in, clock out world of like, I need to know when you're online. And I know remote work has really transformed how we have to think about work and productivity, but like just letting people do what they need to do like in their life, and then also like allowing them to get the work done in the way that best works for them. Like I feel like that's so transformative for so many people to be able to say like, oh, I can block off 2 hours on my calendar to like go do this appointment with my dad. Cool. Like that's not gonna like, I don't have to tell you about that or get approval every time. Like I can just do that and like go do the appointment and then maybe spend another hour in the evening. Like cool. Like that I think just the mental load that we remove from people when we allow them to do those things is huge. And I think that's like kind of the world I like want to live in now, is like I don't want that'd be I think a big turnoff for me is like if I had a boss who was like, hey, I noticed you were offline for 2 hours. Like, where were you? Right? Like I really hope we're moving beyond that now.
Yeah, you're so right. It's like normalize it, Sana, right? What you were talking about before about managers kind of modeling that too. I've had managers who've said, oh, you know what? I'm going to stay home today. This is in the normal times. I'm going to stay home today and just like exercise and you call me if you need me. That gave the rest of us permission to know we could do the same things sometimes. And I think for any kind of caregiver, whether it's for an elderly person or whether it's a child or anywhere in between, just these moments of like, you know what, I'm not doing this meeting right now because I'm going to go have dinner with my family. Like you build that, we do that at Maven, but like you build that into your culture and it gives these green lights to folks that they need as employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think about those green lights. I think we often think about the red flags as well. And I think normalizing that behavior, like Sana mentioned, is super important. And also, Karsten, I like the phrase you used of how do we build wealth for our employees? That is a great, it's a great question and something we should all be asking ourselves as well. I think that answered that someone's question. And then something else that came up was also specific around the candidate experience. So do you think that we are past the period or point of it being taboo to disclose you're a caregiver or a working parent in an interview? If not, do you have examples of language I can use? Should I wait until the end of the interview process, so when they get the offer, to ask what their benefits are in addition to like doing the research online?
I have such thoughts about this. Sana, do you want
I want to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
I think that question alone just stresses me out because it puts so much pressure on the candidate to like have to navigate the internal workings of a company they don't even work at, right? So I feel like it is on people leaders and companies, hiring managers and interviewers to be really clear and really proactive in your employer brand, in your marketing materials, your careers page, your job description, who you are, what you value, and what's okay. Because then there's another green light. Like you tell your candidates, it's okay to talk about this kind of thing. You know, I bet there are probably some companies where it's not okay to talk about that. Like that's, which I don't understand. But this question makes me think specifically about candidates who I have hired when they were pregnant and just the stress those folks felt at not knowing when to say so. And it's a lot easier when you're on Zoom to be like, hi, you know, so like, you don't know. And how awful to put anyone in a position like that, where they have to do this kind of psychological dance before, like, you're not going to hire me if I'm not pregnant, or if I'm pregnant or whatever. And so a lot of that actually comes down to your benefits and being clear. Like, there are companies where parental leave doesn't kick in unless you've been there for a certain amount of time. And something that we're thoughtful about at Maven is being clear that that's not really the case, right? So we gladly and happily hire pregnant people and people who are about to become parents, however, because we know, like, we're just looking for the best people. It doesn't matter what kind of season of your life you're in. And God, just that question makes me feel so sad for people who feel like it's this taboo or like thing. It just feels so burdensome at a time when you've got all this other pressure already. And I just think it's another place for companies to really differentiate themselves.
I agree. And I love that framing because it gives the power back to the candidate to say like, it's on the company to convince you that this would be a place that you'd want to work in terms of being a parent. And like, I love that like it should be extremely obvious from just looking at their website and going through the application process, what they can offer you to make you excited about being whoever you are at this company, right? A parent or whatever race, identity, gender, whatever you're bringing to the table, that's something that you can bring to the table and expect support for. So I love that framing. And I would say like that is like where candidates should be interviewing the company. Like you should be saying like, hey, and by the way, I just did this and I'll be candid. I asked my manager now at Brightwheel when I was interviewing, I said like, listen, I know it's a growing startup, but I'm a new mom and like I have childcare hours. And after that hour's up, I actually do have to step away and like be with my child and caregive. And then like occasionally, of course, if there's something urgent or pressing, right, I'm happy to jump on later. But like I do have pretty firm hours, which is new for me, which by the way, is super scary to say. Like I wasn't really feeling like super excited about disclosing that, but I wanted to because I wanted to make the right choice for me and my family in terms of this opportunity. And then, she talked me through some of the things I just shared with you about Brightwheel's culture and support for parents and why, and it made it super easy for me to say yes when I got the offer. But I do feel like that is also the world I'd like to be living in, is like where candidates are interviewing us about these things and that we feel pressure. Like you shouldn't feel the pressure, right? About an identity or a part of your life, right? And figuring out whether that works for us. You should be asking us like, do we work for you? And what you need out of life right now. And I think that's where the market's taking us. I think the market is going to take us to a place where like we are going to be the ones selling ourselves to candidates, not the other way around.
Yeah, and the reality also going back to both of your earlier points as well is that if you don't feel comfortable asking that during the candidate experience for whatever reason, there are companies that you can interview with that you will get a clear message across their careers page, LinkedIn, like their employer brand at large, that this is something that is not only accepted, but welcomed and celebrated that you're asking as well. So, it's something that is possible out there too. One more question we have is good old ROI, your return on investment. So if you're, investing in these programs, if you're redesigning the wheel here and thinking about these strategies, how do you measure the ROI of your inclusive benefits or supportive strategy for working parents? How do you know it's working? Is it usage of certain things, or people saying, Sana, Karsten, this is great, continue doing it?
A couple different answers to this, right? When I think about Maven, a benefit for families, for women, and for parents, we look at usage, of course, and I know our clients are looking at usage. They're also looking at cost, like I mentioned, right? So through COVID, I think we saw something like a 400% increase in usage, especially around mental health and appointments with mental health providers. But we also saw a real decline in healthcare costs for our clients too, because they were getting that proactive care. So those are two things, but it's pretty specific to us. I think just holistically, people vote with their feet, right? So one of the things I look at a lot is who's staying and why. And if it's the opposite, who's leaving and why. Not wood or plaster or whatever. Like we haven't had people leave because they feel like we didn't have good enough benefits, or we didn't support them or take good enough care of them. But those are the things to be listening to. And you don't really want to have to wait until an exit interview either, right? So survey people throughout, make sure you know who you should be asking and talking to, speak to different cohorts at once. It doesn't always have to be like one big company survey, but there are all different kinds of ways to understand how people feel about things.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think the ROI is your retention and like who's still here, and also who's interviewing with you and who wants to join you. Like that's the ROI. And ROI is such a loaded question with DEI stuff, because I also firmly just believe like putting all of that aside, it's the right thing to do. But I think to quantify the benefits, it really is like the talent, right? Like, and I think companies are already seeing this, that if you're not competitive with what other companies are offering in terms of benefits, in terms of your culture, in terms of the employee experience, like people will leave. Like people are leaving now without even a job in hand because they know they'll get one and that there's plenty of choices, right? So I think the shift to remote work also has made access to opportunities like way higher than before. Like you can now be anywhere and be applying to way more jobs than you could before. So I think like the ROI is going to be your talent. And it's also kind of the survival. It's not about ROI, it's about survival too, I would say at this point. It's not even like to get more on top of what you already have. It's like to survive in this talent marketplace, you're going to have to do these things. Otherwise you will not stand a chance in terms of like what choices people have now.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll add, last year, Maven worked with Great Places to Work, that organization. And we designed and created the biggest ever survey of working parents. And we got all these really interesting insights. But the one that has stayed with me is that if you look at the companies that are, identified as like the best places to work for parents, if you look at the engagement of non-parents at those places, it's materially higher than the engagement of non-parents at other places too. And so the takeaway for me was, if you aim to create a company that is a great place to work for parents, you actually end up making it a great place to work for everybody. And so why not strive to do that, especially at a time when people have lots of options when it comes to their careers.
Yeah.
I think that's a great insight. When you make the environment better for the workplace, better for parents, you make it better for everyone. And it's not only the right thing to do, but it really helps you in terms of the business for retention, talent attraction. And if you want to know how people are feeling, you just have to ask them and, get that data from them and keep asking them to make sure you have that two-way communication. I know we are we are near the end of our conversation, but I always like to ask at the end of our webinars if you had, one or two call to actions to our audience members who are listening live and on demand, what would it be for our conversation today? And I'll pass it to Sana first.
I think my one call to action is I think we're still living through a very like unprecedented time that's like really pushing us, especially as Karsten said, like the people teams, I think across the globe have really been pushed this time to rethink and kind of reevaluate how we're supporting employees and how we manage employees and kind of what benefits we're offering. So I would say like continue to push on the envelope around like what empathy and compassion looks like right now, because there's still a lot of, although like, we're turning a corner on the pandemic, we still have a long ways to go. And I think there's some real burnout that's taking place for everybody, like HR professionals included. Like Karsten and I need a vacation yesterday. Like it's been a tough year. So year and a half. So I think like empathy and compassion, I think needs to be the leading principles for how we're operating right now. And for parents, for caregivers, for underrepresented folks, it's for everybody, for all of us. Like I think everyone is in need of that right now. And I hope that that's kind of something we can walk away with.
For me, I'd say, like Sana said, there is so much that we as people leaders and people teams have going on right now, that it's really easy to ignore or not prioritize benefits or strategy around benefits because it's not the sexiest thing. It's not, it might not never feel like the most pressing, urgent thing when you've got a zillion other things, and Slack blowing up and email and phone calls and all of that. I know. But don't underestimate the power of your benefits, because I think your benefits reveal who you are. And the choices that you've made and the kind of company that you want to be. And so really spend some time being intentional there. A lot of us moving into the open enrollment season, really start thinking about what you want to give to people, what you want people to take from their experience at your company. And when it comes to caregivers, to your parents, to people who are taking care of elderly folks, all of those people, are you doing enough? And if not, what one step can you make? And what are the short-term things you can do? What are the long-term things you can do? And then really put some thought behind it. Don't underestimate this stuff.
Awesome. Think about empathy, compassion, and there are things that you can do tomorrow, even as an individual too. You don't have to be in a leadership role to really create that environment as well, especially in the grassroots company culture, and really think about how you want to lead and interact and support your team members too. Karsten, Sana, thank you so much for taking some time out of your afternoon to share your your insights with us. And that's all the time we have for our panel discussion. And thank you to our audience members for joining and those who are listening on demand as well. And to reiterate, for those who aren't familiar with AllVoices, we really believe in having that employee feedback management platform to really promote a safe workplace with trust, diversity, and transparency at your company. So if you have any questions, please let me know, but have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.